standing in front of the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the clasp on my pearl necklace, when Rosalind appeared in the doorway. She didn't knock. In 22 years, she had never needed to. "Eleanor." Her voice was low, careful. I turned. She was still wearing her apron, the cream-colored one with the small embroidered roses along the hem that my late husband had brought back from a trip to Charleston years ago. She'd worn it so many times the roses had faded to a soft blush. Her hands were pressed flat against the fabric, the way she did when she was trying to hold herself still. "What is it?" I asked. "Come with me," she said, quietly. I remember thinking it was something with the caterer. Maybe the flowers had arrived wrong. We were hosting my son's engagement party. The whole house had been cleaned twice over, the patio strung with lights, 80-something people coming at 6 o'clock. Something always went wrong. That's what I told myself as I followed Rosalind down the hallway. She stopped outside the door to my husband's old study. We still called it that, even though Robert had been gone for 6 years. My son used it sometimes when he visited, to take calls, to spread papers out on the big oak desk. The door was pulled almost shut. A sliver of warm light came through the gap. Rosalind put her hand on my arm, gently but firmly, the way you'd hold someone back from stepping off a curb without looking. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, and then she tilted her head very slightly toward the door. I heard my son's voice first. "She's not going to know the difference, Cynthia. She's 63. She's trusting. That's the whole point." Then a woman's voice, smooth, unhurried. "And the Ashford Road property? That one's not in the trust?" "No. It never got transferred. Dad bought it in the 90s and it just stayed in her name. It's worth close to $800,000 now." A pause. "So we just need her to sign it over before we file the LLC paperwork. If it's in the company, my name's on it as co-founder, and it's protected from whatever she decides later." "What if she asks questions?" "She won't. She never does. I'll tell her it's for tax purposes. She'll probably thank me." I don't remember making a decision to stop breathing. I just did. Rosalind's hand tightened on my arm. I stood there in the hallway of my own home, in my pearl necklace and the navy dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion, and I listened to my son explain to the woman I was about to welcome into this family exactly how he planned to take the land my husband had left me. I need to back up, because none of this will make sense without the full picture. My son's name is Devin. He is 41 years old. He grew up in this house in Macon, Georgia, went to Georgia Tech on a partial scholarship and a whole lot of my late husband's belief in him, and came back to work for 3 years before leaving for Atlanta. I never begrudged him that. Robert and I had always said, give them roots, then let them fly. We meant it. For the first few years after he moved, things were normal. He called most Sundays. He came home for Christmas. He brought girlfriends occasionally. There was a woman named Tamsin who I liked very much, and before her a quiet girl from Savannah who'd never quite warmed up to the South Georgia heat. Then, 18 months ago, he called to tell me he'd met someone. Her name was Cynthia. She was a real estate developer, he said. Smart, driven, knew what she wanted. I said all the right things. I was happy for him. I meant that. But the first time I met her, something sat wrong with me. I couldn't name it then. She was beautiful and polished, and she shook my hand with both of hers and called me Miss Eleanor right away like she'd rehearsed it. She had questions, intelligent questions about the house, about the property, about whether the land behind the garden went all the way to the creek. I told myself I was being a protective mother. I told myself any woman would have asked those things. I told myself a lot of things. The engagement came 3 months ago. A phone call, not a visit. I found out later that Robert's mother had offered the ring she'd left behind, a simple cushion-cut diamond that had belonged to the family since the 1950s, and Cynthia had apparently said she preferred something with more presence. So Devin had bought a new one, and the family ring was still sitting in a box somewhere in Atlanta. I told myself that too was fine. Times change. People have different tastes. Rosalind had not told me any of this was fine. She had been quiet, careful, watching. She had been in this house longer than my own marriage. She started working for us when Devin was in middle school, 2 afternoons a week, to help with cleaning, and over the years she had become something else entirely, someone who knew where everything was kept, who noticed when I hadn't eaten enough, who brought me a cup of tea without being asked on the evenings Robert's absence felt loudest. She was 64, a grandmother of 3, a woman who had buried her own husband the winter before Robert died. We had sat together at her kitchen table the night before his funeral, and she had held both my hands. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has seen you at your worst and stayed anyway. So when she led me to that hallway and pressed her hand against my arm, I didn't question it. I listened. When the voices shifted, Cynthia asking about the guest list, which meant they were wrapping up, Rosalind pulled me, quietly, around the corner and into the kitchen. She shut that door, too. Then she turned to face me. "How long have you known?" I asked. "I heard pieces over the last few weeks," she said. "Phone conversations when they didn't realize the window was open. I wasn't sure I understood it right. I didn't want to upset you over something I might have misheard." She paused. "This afternoon I heard it clearly." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Devin had done homework in the 3rd grade, where Robert and I had eaten breakfast for 31 years. "The Ashford Road property," I said. "Yes." "He knows I haven't changed the deed." "He knows." I looked at my hands on the table. "The party is in 3 hours." Rosalind sat down across from me. She didn't offer comfort and she didn't offer outrage. She just waited, which was the right thing to do. After a while, I said, "I'm gonna need a lawyer." "I know someone," she said. "Her name is Deborah. She handled my mother-in-law's estate. Sharp woman, honest." "Can she see me tomorrow?" "I'll call tonight." I nodded. "Then we're going to go out there, and we're going to host this party, and we're not going to say a word." Rosalind looked at me steadily. "Are you sure?" "I need to understand what I'm dealing with first." I stood up, straightened my dress, checked the clasp on my necklace, "and I need him to feel safe. If he feels safe, he'll keep talking." She stood too. She untied her apron, folded it neatly over the back of the chair. "I'll start on the appetizers," she said. "That party was one of the hardest things I've ever done." 84 people came through my home that evening. My neighbor Patsy, who'd known Devin since he was 7, my late husband's brother Frank, who drove 4 hours from Chattanooga because that's the kind of man he is, friends of mine from church, from the garden club, from the years of building a life in this town. And I stood at the door and I smiled and I hugged people and I accepted toast to Devin and Cynthia's happiness, and I watched my son put his arm around her and beam like he was the most fortunate man in the room. Cynthia played the part well. She was warm with everyone, complimentary about the house, gracious about the food. At one point she put her hand on my arm, the same arm Rosalind had held in the hallway, and said, "Thank you for all of this. I can already tell this family is so special." I smiled. I said, "We're glad to have you." I excused myself twice to use the restroom, and both times I stood in the bathroom and breathed through my nose until my heart stopped hammering. Rosalind moved through the rooms quietly, refilling glasses, collecting plates. Once, when I was standing near the kitchen door, she passed me and said under her breath, without stopping, "Deborah says 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." That was the only moment of the evening that felt real. Deborah Haas had an office on Mulberry Street, above an insurance agency, with 2 mismatched chairs across from her desk and a framed print on the wall of the Georgia State seal. She was my age, maybe slightly older, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the manner of someone who had spent decades hearing difficult things without flinching. I told her everything. I told her about the Ashford Road property, 4 acres on the east side of town, that Robert had bought in 1994 as an investment, that had appreciated quietly while everything around it developed, that had never been transferred into the family trust because, frankly, neither of us had gotten around to it, and then Robert got sick and we had other things to think about. I told her about the LLC, about Cynthia's name on the paperwork, about the phrase my son had used, protected from whatever she decides later. Deborah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He can't take it from you without your signature. You understand that?" "Yes." But if he can get you to sign under the impression it's a tax arrangement, or estate planning, or any other reason that sounds benign, that signature could hold up. I know. So we do two things, she said. First, we get that property transferred into a trust today, properly drafted, with clear terms about who benefits and when. Second, we make sure you understand every document that comes to you before you sign anything. If Devin presents you with paperwork, you tell him you'll have your lawyer review it. End of conversation. He's going to know something has changed. Yes, she said simply, he will. I looked at the Georgia state seal on the wall for a moment. What I can't understand, I said, is how he became this person. I've been trying to figure that out since last night. Deborah didn't answer right away. Then she said carefully, sometimes it's not that they became someone, it's that something brought out what was already there. Someone, maybe. I thought about Cynthia's hand on my arm. This family is so special. Yes, I said. Maybe so. The transfer was filed by the end of the week. Deborah was thorough and fast, and she explained every line to me before I signed anything. The Ashford Road property went into a revocable living trust. My name, my terms, with provisions for what happened to it when I was gone. My two grandchildren from Devin's first marriage, who lived with their mother in Knoxville and called me every other Sunday, were included. Rosalind was included in a way that surprised her and that I want to describe in a moment. In the meantime, Devin called twice that week. Normal calls. How are you? Did everyone get home safely from the party? Cynthia wants to know if you'd like to come see the apartment sometime. I matched his tone exactly. Yes, fine, of course. I'd love to see it. I'm not proud of that. I'd never been a dishonest person. But I had also learned in those days that protecting yourself sometimes looks like patience. About 10 days after the party, the paperwork arrived. It came by FedEx, a thick envelope with a law firm's return address in Atlanta, not Devin's firm, a different one. Inside were documents for what was described as a family investment entity, with myself and Devin as co-founders, and a line near the bottom of the third page requesting my signature to transfer the Ashford Road property into the LLC's assets. There was a handwritten note from Devin, clipped to the front. Mom, this is just standard estate structuring. My tax advisor recommended it. Let me know if you have any questions. I called Deborah. She reviewed it by end of day and called me back. This would have transferred irrevocable ownership of the property to the LLC, she said. Once you signed, you would have had no unilateral right to remove it. Your share of the entity would have been minority interest. Cynthia's share would have been equal to yours. If the LLC were ever dissolved, she and Devin together would have had controlling vote. I was sitting in Robert's chair by the window. His chair, his window, his house that he had built slowly and carefully over decades because he believed in leaving something solid behind. I see, I said. Eleanor. Deborah's voice was even. This was a real attempt. Someone put thought into this. I know. Do you want to confront him? I looked out at the yard. The azaleas were starting to come in. Deep pink, the kind Robert had always liked. Not yet, I said. I want to do one more thing first. I called my son the next morning. I told him I'd received the paperwork and I had some questions, which was true. I told him I'd had my lawyer take a look, which made the line go quiet in a way that lasted just a beat too long. Of course, he said. That's fine, Mom. She had some concerns, I said, keeping my voice warm and unreadable. I think we should probably talk through it in person. Can you come home this weekend? Another pause. Sure, he said. Yeah, we can do that. He came alone. I had asked him to come alone, framing it as wanting some time just the two of us, which once would have been ordinary and now meant something else entirely. He arrived Saturday morning, and I had coffee made and a coffee cake from the bakery on Broadway that he'd always loved, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we had when he was a child. I let him lead. I watched him arrange his words carefully, explain the LLC again, tell me about tax efficiency and asset protection, and how it was all really just about making things simpler for me. He was good at it. He was composed and reasonable, and he looked at me with an expression that I recognized, one that said, You can trust me. I'm handling this. You don't need to worry. I'd seen that expression my whole life. I had always trusted it. Devin, I said when he was done, I know about the conversation in the study. He stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a cardinal was at the feeder Robert had hung from the eave 20 years ago. What conversation, he said, but his voice had changed. Before the party, I said, you and Cynthia, the Ashford Road property, being protected from whatever I decide later. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee cup, very carefully, like he was trying to buy time by making careful gestures. Mom, that was. I'm not asking you to explain it, I said. I'm telling you I know, and I'm telling you that the property has been transferred into a trust that I control entirely, drafted by my attorney, with terms I understand and that no one can alter without my consent. I paused. I'm also telling you that I've updated my full estate plan. It's all in order now. Deborah helped me with that this week. He was looking at the table. I love you, I said, and I meant it completely, even then. You are my son, and I have loved you every day of your life, and I will love you every day of whatever comes next. But I will not hand over what your father built because someone told you it was a smart financial strategy. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He hadn't cried in front of me since he was, I don't know, 14, 15 maybe. I don't, he stopped. Started again. I don't have a good explanation. I'm not asking for one today. She said it was just being practical, protecting the assets. Unsure she did. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I think, in that moment, he saw something he'd been choosing not to see for a while. Are you ending things with us? He asked. As a family? No, I said. But I need you to be honest with me. Going forward, all the way forward, about everything. And I need you to think carefully about what you're building with that woman, and whether she is asking you to be someone I raised you not to be. He didn't answer that directly. He nodded. He drank the rest of his coffee. He ate a piece of the coffee cake. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and he said, Is Rosalind here? She's in the garden. He went out back. I watched from the kitchen window as he walked over to where she was cutting back the jasmine along the fence. I couldn't hear what he said, but he stood there for a few minutes, and she listened, and then she patted him once on the shoulder, the way she'd done when he was a teenager with a broken heart or a bad grade, and he went back inside and said goodbye to me and drove away. That was 8 months ago. Devin and Cynthia's engagement ended in the fall. He told me it was mutual. I don't know all the details and I don't need to. What I know is that he's been coming home more often, calling more honestly, and that once on a Sunday afternoon in November, he sat with me in the living room for 3 hours and we talked about his father. Really talked. The way we hadn't in years. I'll take that over a lot of things. The trust is still in place. Deborah reviews it with me annually. The Ashford Road property will go, when the time comes, to a combination of my grandchildren and a small gift to the Macon Historical Society in Robert's name, because he always loved this town's history and it seemed right. Rosalind is named as a beneficiary in a separate arrangement, a portion of the liquid assets from the estate, enough to matter, not as a transaction but as an acknowledgement. She found out when I told her, sitting at the same kitchen table with cups of tea between us, and she was quiet for a long time before she said, Eleanor, you didn't have to do that. I know, I said. You're going to make me cry in your kitchen. You've cried in my kitchen before. She laughed then, the way she does when something is funny and also true. I've thought, many times since that night in the hallway, about what would have happened if she hadn't stopped me. If I had walked past that door without hearing it, smiled my way through the party, taken the FedEx envelope at face value, and signed the page my son put in front of me, because I trusted him and couldn't imagine a reason not to. I think about how easy that would have been, how much I wanted to believe the simple version. But Rosalind had stood in my doorway in her faded apron and she had said my name the way you say someone's name when you need them to pay attention, and she had given me the thing I needed most, without knowing exactly what I would do with it. That is 22 years of choosing to stay in a person's life, right there. That is what it looks like. I'm not sure I have earned that kind of loyalty. I'm not sure anyone earns it. I think it is given, quietly, by people who see who you actually are and decide it matters. Robert would have loved her. He did love her. He used to say whenever she'd done something thoughtful he hadn't expected, "Where did we find Rosalind?" And I would always say, "She found us." I still believe that. I keep coming back to that hallway, the sliver of light under the study door, the sound of my son's voice saying things I was never supposed to hear. People talk about betrayal like it arrives as a single blow. In my experience, it doesn't. It arrives as a series of small moments you didn't understand at the time. A question about the creek boundary, a pause on the phone that lasted a beat too long, a handwritten note clipped to legal documents that said, "This is just standard," when it wasn't standard at all. The blow comes later, when you line all those moments up and finally see what they were pointing to. What I've learned, what this whole thing taught me, if I'm being honest, is that the most dangerous thing is not the person trying to take something from you. It's the version of yourself that doesn't want to know. I had that version. She stood in her pearl necklace and smiled through 84 people and told herself she was being a good mother by not making a scene. And she wasn't wrong exactly. But she also wasn't fully awake yet. Rosalind woke me up, not with a speech, not with anger, just by standing in a doorway and saying my name the right way. That is its own kind of courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She could have decided it wasn't her place. She could have decided it wasn't her place. She could have told herself she probably misheard. She had every reason to stay quiet and no reason, on paper, to put herself in the middle of something that wasn't her family's trouble. But she had spent 22 years choosing to show up honestly, and that's what honest people do when it matters. They don't calculate, they just act. I think about Devin too. I think about him more gently than I expected to. He was not a bad person who revealed himself. He was a decent person who made a series of choices under the influence of someone who framed those choices as practical, as smart, as just the way things work. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains something. And the fact that he stood in the backyard and let Rosalind put a hand on his shoulder, that he came home for 3 hours in November and talked about his father, that tells me the person I raised is still there. He had the clarity to recognize what he'd become and the backbone to stop. That combination, knowing when you've gone wrong and being willing to say so, is not small. A lot of people never manage it. What I did in those weeks, I think, was refuse to confuse love with passivity. I loved my son, and I protected what was mine. Those two things were not in conflict. A woman can hold both. She can sit at the kitchen table with coffee cake and speak plainly and mean every word of it, including "I love you," and especially, but I will not sign that page. I did not do it perfectly. I was frightened more than I let on. I sat in Robert's chair by the window and looked at the azaleas and wondered what he would have done, and I didn't always have a clean answer, but I kept moving. I called the lawyer. I read every document. I asked every question. That steadiness, just continuing to act carefully one step at a time, when every instinct says to either collapse or explode, that's what got me through. And Rosalind is in the will. She found out at the kitchen table over tea, and she said I didn't have to do that. I told her I knew. Some things you do not because you have to, but because it's simply what's right, and because the people who stayed deserved to know they were seen. Robert used to say, "She found us." I still believe that, and I believe that what finds you over a lifetime has a great deal to do with who you've been willing to be.